So it feels like Jesus is tricking us in this gospel. We have the Pharisee who says, "Thank you that I'm not like the rest of humanity, or even like this tax collector." And I don't know about you, but my thought is, well, thanks be to God I'm not like this Pharisee. Maybe that didn't land well, I'm not sure. But it's true, isn't it? You know, we see this Pharisee's kind of reprehensible in a way, and we don't like how he treats the tax collector, and yet I think immediately it's tempting for us to say that to ourselves. Well, thanks be to God I'm not like him. And the reality is, and Jesus' point is, we all have the capability of being like the Pharisee. It's possible for any one of us to struggle with this type of pride and ego. There was this speaker who was invited to this big conference, and he was one of the headline speakers. He was one of the most popular ones that they invited. And so when he arrived to this conference, he was picked up in a limo at the airport. He was brought to the hotel. There was someone there to greet him. And he was brought to his room. And then he was brought to the auditorium where he was going to give his speech. And before his speech, they gave him a nice ceramic mug with coffee in it. The very next year, he was invited to the same conference. This time, he wasn't in the same job he was before, so he was not a headline speaker. He was not one of the main events of the conference, so to speak. And so when he arrived at the airport, there was no limo. He had an Uber. When he got to the hotel, he had to find his room by himself. And eventually, when he found himself in the conference room, he was going to give his talk, he asked for some coffee, and they said, "Oh, over there on the table, there's a nice styrofoam cup for you." And what he said in his reflection on this experience was he learned that he never deserved, he was never owed the ceramic mug. He only deserved the styrofoam cup. And there's something about this story that I like for this weekend's gospel, and I think it makes us reflect on two things. Which spirituality do we have? Do we have a spirituality of pride and ego? A spirituality of, I will call the ceramic mug, where we think we're owed the mug? Or do we have a spirituality of humility and grace, where we recognize honestly who we are and what we deserve? And I think that's the question for us to reflect on this weekend. And so here we have our Pharisee who, I'm going to say is kind of representing the former. He's representing the spirituality of the ceramic mug, the one of the pride and ego. And listen to how he exemplifies it for us today. He says, "Oh God, I thank you that I'm not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector." In other words, God, I don't have weaknesses. I don't have sins. I am just awesome. That's his prayer. I'm just awesome. Thank you. And not only that, the second thing is, right before that, he says, the Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. To himself. In other words, he's not praying to God, he's praying to himself. Self, you're awesome, I can rely on me. So it's, I'm awesome, and self-reliance. I can take care of me. Which, of course, leads to, I can do what I want. It's my will. My will be done. That's the spirituality of pride and ego. But here's the problem. It's fragile. Once something happens, once something big happens, a storm in life or some, God forbid, imperfection becomes so apparent that even he can't ignore it. It's just like a ceramic mug that falls and hits the tile floor. It'll shatter. His whole life will fall apart because he's relied on himself only. And there's an isolation there that once life is hard, who does he reach out to if he's never learned to reach out to God or others? And that's the danger of pride and ego. But what about our tax collector? What does he do? Well, again, first of all, it's not like Jesus is really affirming the tax collector here. I mean, he's kind of a bad guy, so we have to remember that. This is not like Matthew, where Matthew was a tax collector and left his former way of life. This is an actual tax collector who still is a tax collector. But Jesus at least affirms that he recognizes who he is before the Lord. He recognizes the sinfulness that he has. And so he has this, I think, spirituality of humility, where he goes before the Lord and says, this is who I am. Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I struggle with sin. I'm powerless to sin. I have weaknesses. It's not I'm awesome, it's Lord, I struggle, and I know I'm weak. And of course, be merciful to me, oh God, which means, God, only you can help me. I can't do it myself. Self-reliance isn't going to work. It's going to take your help, your grace, for me to overcome whatever weaknesses and sins that I possess. Which, of course, leads to, not my will, but yours, Lord, be done. And I love this because this is what I would call a durable spirituality. You know, as you imagine, right, a ceramic mug, when it falls on a tile floor, it'll break and shatter. But what will happen to a styrofoam cup? It's not going to break. It may get dented or bruised or whatever. And then the Lord picks us up and he smooths out the rough edges. And he helps us to start again. And so I think the overall point of this gospel is this: where ego ends, grace begins. Where ego ends, grace begins. And the invitation for us is this. You know, I read this article several years ago, and I tried to find it for this weekend. I couldn't find it. So I'm trying to remember the things, which is usually not a good thing. So I apologize. If you try to find this article and you find it and I got it all wrong, I confess now, I'm sorry. But here's what I remember, so you have to take my word for it, is that people who are humble are healthier. And people who possess the virtue of humility are healthier for a few reasons. One, because when life is difficult, they reach out to God for help. When life is difficult, they're not in isolation. They're usually able to reach out to their family and friends, so they have connectedness and community to help them through. And here's the beautiful part, too. Humble people are more patient in the foibles, sins, and weaknesses of other people. Because when they see other people's weaknesses, they're like, I'm weak too. I get it. So they're more patient. So the invitation for us, my friends, is to have this spirituality of humility and grace. Humility that goes before the Lord and says, Lord, this is who I am. I need you. Your will, not mine. Which opens us up to that life of grace so that God can indeed help us to be free from the things that we struggle with.